what really happened in Davos last week? You probably caught the highlights on CNBC or maybe your favorite CarCast, but the best way, in fact, the only way to know what really happened in our field, in data and AI, in my opinion, is to talk to people who are like you and I, and particularly interested in this field. And they spend the entire week at Davos talking about data, AI, and analytics. So this week, I have invited a very special guest. You know him. He's been on the CarCast before, and he's going to break down for us everything that happened in data, AI, and analytics at Davos. He also recently published a very popular piece on demystifying AI agents. So we're going to talk about that as well. In fact, I am going to give you a very special resource to help a little bit with that. So if you're interested in the topic, you're going to want to stick around until the end of the CarCast. If you're just discovering this CarCast, stop everything you're doing right now. Subscribe at the link down here, carcast.substack.com. The link is down below here. It's free, and as a subscriber, you're going to get access to special resources like the one I just talked about. Now, before we get to our special Davos guests, I want to point your attention to the latest predictions posted by Gartner recently. I will, of course, see you at the Data and Analytics Summit in March, but before we get there, there's some predictions that are probably worth for you taking a look at. The first one is that Gartner forecasts that IT spending will reach $5.6 trillion in 2025. That's a 9.8% year-over-year increase. We're almost hitting here double-digit growth forecast. And get this, if you're in software, for software spending, Gartner projects a 14.2% increase to 1.2 trillion globally. If you compare that to what they did last year, they projected a 6.8 year-over-year increase, and the actuals are not in yet, but the rumors are that we, in fact, landed higher than that. So 14% forecast shows incredible acceleration. So if all goes as planned, this year should be an exciting one in tech. The other projections that you probably want to pay attention to involve things we've talked about before: BCIs, brain computing interfaces, robots, and governance. By 2030, 60% of IT workers will be enhanced or depending on BCI technologies, and some of it will be employer funded. Gartner also predicts that by 2030, 80% of us will engage with smart robots. Today, we're at 10%. And then finally, just to come down to earth a little bit, to things that are maybe more pragmatic for you, Gartner points out to the fact that governance and AI governance platforms in particular will become huge moving forward, particularly when it comes to getting AI and Gen AI into production. What they found is the benefits are clear for those who focus on AI governance. They predict that enterprises using AI governance platforms will achieve 30% higher customer trust ratings and a 25% better regulatory compliance scores than their competitors. So bottom line here, I'm not going to call 2025 the year of AI governance, but suffice to say, if you want AI and Gen AI in particular to take off at your company, you better look for an enterprise governance solution, as we say in French, to the suite. All right, it's time now for a special guest to come in. He used to be a Gartner analyst, so he might give us some prescription on how to think about these projections. But first, let's bring him in and ask him how his experience at Davos was like and what he took away from it. Let's welcome Sanjeev Mohan to the CarCast. Sanjeev, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much. By the way, I am still in transit, so I apologize if there's a little bit of loud sounds behind me. I'm at an airport. It was Davos is an enigma. It is so hard to decipher, and the first time you go, you have like no idea what to do. My biggest lesson, you'll find this funny. You know how many events we see each other at? Every event I go to, I have an agenda. I know exactly what I'm doing. This is the first time I realized that Davos is very different. It is totally self-directed. There are 300 events going on, and you get to pick and choose where you want to go. And it's a very big alpine setting party, basically. People networking, getting to know each other, attending sessions, but it's all self-directed. And that was my big lesson, where I had to pick and choose where do I get invited, because some, like Bloomberg House, was completely oversubscribed.
Yeah.
CNBC, I managed to get in, so I actually attended some very, very good sessions at CNBC. But you don't know where you'll get in, and you may sign up for more than one session, and then you have to decide which one to pick.
And I remember how excited you were getting ready for it. I mean, it's not the first time that Davos talks about AI. I mean, last year they published this piece on the intelligent age. This year, one of the themes was the industries in intelligent age. I remember the blog that they published where they said the intelligent age, driven by rapid advancements in AI, quantum, and blockchain, is transforming everything and changing it right now in real time. So it's very much like what you're describing here is that it's just chaos and it's difficult to kind of slow down, step back, and then get a sense of what really is going on. And so, what did you observe there? What were the main themes, particularly in data AI and analytics, that you think are important for us to think about?
Blockchain and AI, these were like two worlds that collided. And there were people from blockchain who told me, we're hearing about AI agents, we don't know what they are. And then there were people from AI who were asking, should we even be thinking about crypto and blockchain? And so there were a lot of meetings I got pulled into where we were trying to see what is the overlap. And we came up with some really interesting ideas. For example, blockchain is a very trusted way to do financial transactions, but blockchain by itself is very slow, or distributed
Yeah.
ledger. There are faster options that are now available. For example, there's one called Hedera. So can we have blockchain like technologies like Hedera be integrated into an AI agent so I can do micropayments?
Yeah.
And like every time I make a reservation or I do some scheduling and I need to pay a few pennies, blockchain might be actually a very good option to do that. So these kind of discussions were literally being had for the first time by two worlds that were colliding.
Now, there were quite a few announcements. I mean, announcements around AI infrastructure. I mean, particularly around data centers and investments around new technology. There's focus on multimodal AI and generative AI governance announcements. How do people get themselves ready for this? When they go to Davos, do you find that there was a lot of practitioners talking about solutions, or did you find that it was more, talking heads talking about big concepts?
There were a lot of very senior executives who were there to sign deals. So there were a lot of, but so this is not a place for practitioners, if I may. Uh, it's uh, it's more for people trying to understand what's going on. I also noticed, by the way, a lot of leaders I talked to, they said we came with our own agenda, but then when we got to Davos, the agenda changed because so much was happening in data and AI. I'll give you an example of infrastructure was a very big deal. In fact, Stargate got announced. So all of a sudden, you start hearing about this $500 billion investment in AI. Then the other thing that also happened that shook the attendees quite a bit was all of a sudden the Chinese companies announced how advanced their models had become. But the big thing that happened was that DeepSeek R1, which got released during the week of Davos, was trained at a budget of only $5 million. So it was like at a fraction of the cost of what other large US companies are spending. So in my opinion, this is a huge game changer because it's fully open source, including the data set. But the second thing is that in the US, we pay massive salaries to our AI engineers. The cost of training DeepSeek is equal to one engineer's salary. So I think these high paid jobs are going to get disrupted because how in the world is Meta going to compete with DeepSeek? If the model cost is 20 to 50 times more to train than what's available for almost free these days. Uh, so that's one. The second interesting thing that I also noticed was that until we got to Davos, we were thinking about AI slightly differently. But once we were there, we realized that reasoning models are going to become the de facto standard. And these models, through things like model distillation and then post-training techniques, uh, are going to become so efficient and small that they will run everywhere. And
Yeah.
even the smallest model with 32 billion parameter is going to be capable to do reasoning. And so AI agents were everywhere. Everybody was talking about AI agents.
Can we break this down a little bit? I mean, this is the first
Yeah.
one you talked about is interesting on this concept we have on cost and resourcing. I think the debate in the US has been about investing in more infrastructure because you're going to need that, and the costs would be highly correlated with the outcome. But here it just feels like with the advent of open source and the learnings that we have on how to run these models, you can in fact compete at much lower costs and get outcomes that you might not have seen maybe a year ago. I mean, I heard the speech of the CPO at OpenAI who talked about how much the cost of the latest models were so much cheaper than the new models. But I think if you start with the baseline was incredibly high to start with. So I think there's a disruption going on here where the investment might not be directly correlated with the result. And you can actually, because of open source and because of investment in maybe commodity resourcing, you can get fairly reasonable outcomes. What is that? Is that a worrisome trend or is that a positive one?
I think it's a positive one. All the way up to the beginning of 2024, it was all about large models. And this is what we now call pre-training. Throw as much data as you can and build a model with 405 billion parameter, and there you go. But in 2025, we are squarely into what we are calling post-training, where it's more about the quality of data and how relevant it is, rather than the entire world's data which is being used. So I think the data center requirements are going to at some point, they're still going up because the volume is so large, but it's going
Yeah,
to start plateauing. And this fear about like these massive data centers are needed to train these models. I think all that is going to temper. And so we are now in the era of post-training, where we
yeah,
are saying that let's take relevant data, uh, and also, by the way, we need it to improve reliability, because pre-training, you get amazing results, but then the models hallucinate. So
yeah,
now we are doing more supervised fine-tuning, reinforcement learning with human feedback. So there's a shift happening towards smaller domain-specific models. And I
yeah.
think with those, the requirement of infrastructure needed for training and inference is going to be a lot less.
And you and I have talked about this in the past where, this focus on price performance is where leaders' head needs to be at, right? I mean, the idea that you need to have a cost-effective supply chain focused on what your moat really is as an enterprise might not be the volume of the data, but might be how accurate, how specialized that data is. So it matters in training, but also then in inference, it matters because you have very specific answers and you can rely on the quality of those answers. And so I think there's kind of few trends coming together that are definitely driving us towards domain specific smaller
Yep.
models, because cost, need of accuracy, quality, and the fact that these models are where it starts in order to start automating tasks that you can rely on and govern, right? I mean, the other piece of what we're not talking about here is that we have large models with data that might not be high quality. It's really hard to imagine you would want to automate a set of actions and tasks and empower agents because of the low level of confidence you might have on the data that did the training.
So everything that you said about domain specific and then making these models actionable. So what is happening is that these models are now so good. When you ask a question, they can actually go through many different possible solutions, and then they can test them at inference time and pick the one that is the most correct. So all this was not possible at this time last year, or it was just not sophisticated enough. I feel that a lot of companies in the AI model training space are going to be disrupted.
Yeah, it feels like we're really entering now a second phase in this
Yes.
industry where we're learning a lot from the first phase, which was very intense in infrastructure and resources and data. Or now we're just narrowing it down. We're kind of getting to the next phase. I know you have to catch a plane, so I don't want to delay you. I do have a question around your perspective on what I talked about earlier, the Gartner predictions. So you were at Gartner, you worked on these predictions. How should we think about these predictions? Do we take them to the letter? Do we step back? What's the best way to think about how we ingest them, particularly in the way that Gartner gets to them in the first place?
These predictions are coming from my former colleagues and my friends. I have tremendous respect for the work they do. They talk to a lot of people, but having said that, the rate of change that we are seeing in AI is so fast that I would I would have a very open mind. I think
Yeah.
these predictions, the prediction that you and I make today may not even be valid 2 to 3 weeks from now because something new has come up. So, like some of the things we've just talked about are literally a week old, and so I think I would be very careful making predictions. In fact, when I had to write my 2025 predictions document, I made a conscious decision not to even call it predictions, but call it trends.
It's funny. You and I might have talked about this. When I worked at Microsoft, one of the things that Bill Gates taught us is we always overestimate the change that occurs in the
Yes,
next 2 years, and we underestimate the change that occurs in the next 10.
yes,
And so with predictions is always, take it with a grain of salt because rate of change in this industry, I mean, particularly over the last 2 years, has accelerated in a way that we can't control it. And so the best remedy I can see is educate yourself, stay
yeah,
connected with the community, engage, continue to ask questions. That's why this week I'm going to share with everyone listening to us this resource, everything you need to know about AI and agents. A lot of it actually came from your blog that you wrote that I'm going to send everyone to, demystifying AI agents. And I hope that this will help folks listening to us. It was great to catch up with you. I'm going to let you catch
likewise. Thank you.
your flight, and we will see all of you next time.